other one, you bastard!
Brought to you by Robotoyz. More information in a moment.
Although petty arguments on the internet would have you believe, one's collecting journey is never stagnant. When we start out, we know so little. We have to scrounge around on the internet, find out what we actually had as children if we still have anything at all, and then figure out where we are in the grand scheme of things. We start forming friendships, getting exposed to new ideas, and in some ways, finding our own identity. However, when the journey commences, it's not just knowledge that takes root, it's also biases. People find out what they like and what they don't like, and sometimes, regrettably, they decide they're not willing to try things outside of their comfort zone. I don't need to mention any specific examples. Chances are, if you're a fan of Transformers and are watching this channel, you already have an example in your head. I'm no stranger to this ailment. I liked to assume I was always open to everything the franchise threw at me. However, at some point, I became complacent. At some point, I decided what combiners should and shouldn't be. And I concluded that any company that deviated from that was simply being lazy and exhibiting warped priorities. That was until one fateful day, when I walked into a friend's house and saw Magic Square Breakdown and Wilds Rider on the table. The friend's house is long gone, along with his inclination to dive headfirst into third-party legends. He realized it just wasn't for him. However, the effects of that day still remain. Greetings, Cybertronians. I'm DrLockdown, and today's diagnosis brings you the finale of a 4-part series. Welcome to the conclusion of Menasor. For the 4th and final installment, I present to you the combined form of Magic Square Menasor, also known as the greatest combiner in my collection. But before we get to the brilliance, we have to scale it back a bit. Any overview of the team has to compare the individual components, and although we've had ample time to do such, one final look at the team as a group is in order before things really kick off. Honestly, the vehicle mode lineup legitimately looks exquisite. There are some combiners that look amazing together regardless of which version you deal with. Devastator is one such combiner. In vehicle mode, it's borderline impossible to f*** up, although the Combiner Wars versions sure as hell tried to. The Stunticons aren't exactly. They're not that hard to get right in vehicle mode, but the potential for f***ing it up is still there. The old Fans Project versions are a good example of this. They aren't a bad set in vehicle mode, but they always seemed off. And if you want a properly bad set, well, look no further than Combiner Wars. God, especially compared to Legacy, these guys look cheap as shit. As such, it's important to praise companies when they get it right, and Magic Square most certainly does in this instance. The realistic designs of the 4 cars gel together super well, and even with the deviations, Motormaster fits in nicely, trailer or no. If you're getting things for vehicle mode, there's nothing to worry about. Although for display options, I highly recommend keeping the trailer on. It just gives that set that extra oomph. The Robo modes also look really damn good next to each other as well. It's a bit of a relief that they do actually. The set kinda started off really toon accurate before slowly evolving into a more stylized affair. Ironically, this is the exact same thing people criticized Unique Toys Bruticus for, which as I mentioned in a previous video was designed by the same person. Guess old habits die hard, but fortunately these 5 still remain nice and cohesive. They also run circles around pretty much every other Magic Square release before and after. Even my previous favorites like Ultra Magnus. The good Ultra Magnus that is, not the bullshit they conjured up in a week or two after seeing what New Age was doing. Honestly, seeing the quality on these makes me feel sad, because although I know Magic Square can go back to this level of quality, they flat out haven't. But ah well, such is life. We don't always get what we want. But maybe we can dull the pain by purchasing more Transformers. What? I'm not coping, you're coping! Who am I kidding? This is totally coping. But perhaps we can cope together with today's sponsor, Robotoyz. Robotoyz is one of Australia's leading Transformer-focused online toy retailers, and they've been instrumental in delivering me the last 3 members in this set. From official to unofficial to masterpiece to legends, they've got practically everything. Now, if you're Australian and have sat through the previous 3 episodes and still somehow haven't given them a shot yet, make sure to use the promo code DrLock 10% off if or when you finally do. But anyway, the combined mode has been put off for too long at this point. Let's finally build this fellow up so I can show you the goods. Now, one of the things this community has consistently done from day one is call this whole combiner skeleton system lazy. I mean, on paper, I kinda get it. Hell, that used to be my ideology. But I have to say for those people, have you ever actually experienced a transformation that uses that system? Because yes, it can be lazy, or it can also be Magic Square Menasor. The amount of work they've put into this is absolutely staggering. The transformation on the skeleton really reminds me of the origami-style engineering seen on the old MiPad Soundwave. Or I suppose more recently MP Gatai Shorky, where it goes from a giant oblong to a really cohesive robot. But even then, this shit's on another level. Now, the leg components do not need to be transformed, they just need to remain in their vehicle mode, unless you're putting them on the backs of the legs like the cartoon. So these are just fine as is. As for the arm components, they're best started off in robot mode before transforming them because of the way the peg works. You'll notice when you rotate it 90 degrees, you can actually slide the whole thing out, given how that kind of peg there works. If you try doing that in vehicle mode, it's just going to be a pain in the ass. And then of course, once these are separated, you can transform them into their vehicle components. The primary differences being that the waist section folds up into the lower half and you leave the chest up for the top half. So not much craziness over there. And of course, the same thing happens with drag strip, where you separate the waist section and then transform it into its vehicle mode components. Unfortunately, there's no way to actually get rid of the waist peg over here. It's just not something it does. And same with the arms, but you know, we have the sign for that. Also, since we're engaging with combining parts forming anyway, I just like to keep the spoiler on for this mode. With the individual bots, it's kind of like, parts forming between modes. But for combinations, whatever, it works fine. And now for the meat and potatoes, the main event. First thing you want to do is separate these back parts just so that they're out of the way and we get a bit of clearance. Take this whole section down like that. Take this whole top section off like that. Bring out these two panels to the side like so. Should give us just enough clearance to get these panels out to the side there. Come to the bottom and separate the feet from everything else, and you'll notice that's one of the biggest issues with this. The feet part kind of fall off. The reason they're not fully connected in is so that you can actually swap them and have the Toon feet on the toy design and vice versa. I'm annoyed that it's not super stable, but I kind of get why. Anyway, you push the wheel in like so. You need to rotate the foot off just a little bit so you got enough clearance to rotate this section around and push that in like so as well. And then you fold up the foot like that, and yeah, you got a foot. Now we should have enough clearance to separate the legs. Come to the waist section and pull up these sections like that. That will allow you to use these hinges to rotate the legs fully into place and rotate the thighs fully into place. And you're already getting the Toon accurate robot legs there. However, I'm just going to rotate them to the back so that it's easier to see the transformation, and because it's my preferred aesthetic. And why is this not rotating? Come on. You want to take the back bumper section and use the hinges to rotate it inwards just so that it will disappear into the legs like so. Take these hinges and rotate them inwards like that, and then these sections rotate around like so that the whole back leg clips into place, and you can see how it works there. And then you take the feet and rotate it into place. It rotates one way, but regardless of which way you go, you can get the ankle tilt. But oh no, there's no front feet. This is because the toy-styled feet, or the ankle supports if you're going for the Toon-styled feet, are separate pieces. Much like the shoulder blocks, I would have loved for them to have been incorporated into the design fully and have them store in the vehicle mode, but it's not the worst thing in the world. Now you can take these panels and rotate them around 180 degrees. Come around to the back and take this panel off using the hinges. Come on, why aren't you getting off? There we go. It has two side panels here that rotate inwards, then this whole thing rotates around and goes to the butt plates. And then these panels that you rotated around also have folding in panels there. You're starting to see how well this cleans up. You want to take this front section and pull it up just a little bit. Come around to the top and pull these sections down and also pull this section up. You need to start jostling the whole thing loose so that the whole thing comes apart like so. And you're starting to see how this is going to work. So this head part rotates down, which will allow you to bring these two side panels up, and then you can bring the full robot head up to the top there. And if you haven't already, this back section also slides forward just a little bit, or I suppose back because we're facing the back of the robot. You separate the arm pieces from there so that you can have the whole thing fold in on each other. These bits are going to fold up, but don't clip them all the way in yet because we've still got stuff to do. You've got this back panel that rotates to the back, which is why we didn't clip it in just yet, because that's going to fold all the way in there. Then this front bit rotates outwards, and this whole section rotates up, and then the front bit clips into place and the whole thing lines up. Then we're going to need to flatten out this panel so that this bit can rotate in there, and then the whole thing can click together like so. So it's basically out, rotate in, rotate out, rotate around like so, and clip back into place, rotate in again, and then the whole thing clips together. It's an accordion madness. And now that that whole section's done, this whole section will tab into the torso like that, locking it all together. You got these side bits that just fit back into the arms like that, and the arms rotate down, and the fists rotate down like so. Also, the arms extend, but gravity will usually do that for you. Same with this side, there we go, rotate down, gravity has pulled it down, there we go. And the head, of course, course rotates down and we are good to go. Now Motormaster seems easy, but there's one tiny annoyance. The basic idea is that you open up the panel on the back here, it rotates around and slides onto the back like so. But there's one small problem. For the clearance, you also need to get these wheels into place, which means you have to get the whole thing into almost its robot configuration, then rotate it around, then close the whole thing back up again. And that's not something that's very useful. It's a bit annoying in the way it works, and I just wish there was an easier way to do this, but I guess you have to untransform it and then transform it back. Everything else is really smooth, albeit a little bit under-engineered, but yeah, you fold up those back panels and then that just becomes a cube. Cube fits into the back of the chest and locks on the top of the head like so, and you can already see that falling down, which is going to be one of my main gripes for later. The cars are very simple, they just clip onto the front of the legs. No complaints there, just nice and easy. And the arms skeleton up pretty easily as well. Granted, it's not as crazy and clever as the Legacy version with its sort of spring gimmick, but for a Legends figure, it definitely gets the job done. So again, no real complaints from me. Oh, and I forgot to mention, you actually have to bring these panels out to fill out the chest like that, so that's the waist section done. You can just see how many pieces of transformation go into this. It's not lazy at all, it's inspired. We've gone from an oblong to this. And we're not even done yet, we've still got to do these little blocks with that folding up, this whole section rotating around with that folding out, and we get the shoulder blocks. Not in focus, but you. And these panels rotating down so you can plug the damn thing in, and the whole thing plugs together, almost taking a dead end off in the process. And I know this transformation sequence has been pretty scatterbrained, but that's just because it's so damn fun. I want to keep doing it, and not on camera, I just want to do it for funsies. The engineering is complicated, but it's not overcomplicated like something like Ragnar would be. It just works. A complicated transformation doesn't necessarily mean a bad transformation, and this is the perfect example of that. No other combiner I've messed with has engineering like that. Not even the Iron Factory DJD, which comes close, but it's not quite on this level. This is a level all in itself. This is a classification all in itself. This combiner is amazing. The engineering is what makes it, along with a bunch of other things. So if you're wanting a Menasor to flip back and forth, it does that. If you've been convinced already, just go out and buy it already. And if you haven't, well, we've still got the rest of the video. If I had to describe Magic Square Menasor's combined mode in one word, nothing would cut it save for the word amazing. Just everything about it. It's absolutely breathtaking. While not without flaw, this is a figure that goes above and beyond in pretty much every capacity. Everything from the sculpting, to the paintwork, to the solidity, to the articulation, to the sheer presence. This combiner is simply something else. Seriously, no other third-party Legends combiner in my collection compares to this. Hell, no other combiner in my collection, period, compares to this. Now, something to keep in mind though is that this is simply one loadout for the design. This is what my personal tastes dictate. Basically the Studio Ox system with leg cars on the front and splits on the arm ones. You may not like this system, especially with the ways dead end and drag strip work, but just bear with me, we'll get to that. First up though, the head sculpt looks absolutely beast. It seriously baffles me that out of this whole set, only one head sculpt fell short in the sculpting department, especially when you consider the way Magic Square usually operates. Of course, this is the toy/Studio Ox style head, leaning closer to the latter, and it's really well done. The spikes look mean as and the vents carry themselves quite well. Dig the chiseled chin too, really brought to life through the awesome sculpting and sweet silver paintwork. They also painted the middle crest too, a detail that seems wholly unnecessary given its subtlety, but hey, I appreciate it. The collarbone blocks are also spectacular, although they kinda just follow their own aesthetic. They've got the top grills that are emblematic of both the toy and Studio Ox design, but the bottom sections aren't of either. They're completely original, and although doing them up in yellow would have been a lovely touch, I'll still take it. And hey, if you're allergic to this aesthetic cue, you can always remove them to go for more of the toon style. They've sculpted this section in fully, so you're not seeing any ugly bits underneath. Again, I think it's a real missed opportunity that these don't store in the trailer mode in any capacity, but given some of the extra functionality later, the blow is fairly softened. The Ox aesthetic continues on the torso, bringing back the car drone aesthetic in a rather reserved manner. You only get a few simple bits of silver here, but it works damn well. Once again, they've taken liberties with some of the extra mechanical detail, and I feel it works a lot better here than the shoulder spikes. Not to say those were bad, it's just these are better. I ultimately went with the toon styles waist though, just because it ironically packed in more detail than than the toy style. I mean, look at that clear purple insert, it's making Kingdom/Legacy Cyclonus blush. The arms are also insanely well done, all of the awesome paintwork is on show, especially in the case of Dragstrip with his extra brown stripes. While I ultimately prefer the transformation of the Legacy version because Jesus Christ this is well done, I can't deny that the Magic Square one looks better. The cars feel much more cohesive with the rest of the arm, despite the Legacy version ironically having less of a proportional dissonance between the car undersides. And sure, I've seen complaints about Dead End's hands sitting in plain view, but from most angles, honestly, you barely notice it. Plus, besides, look at the sign. Look at it! Moving down to the legs, the thigh pieces are alright, I suppose. Nothing really worth noting here, aside from the fact that KO retooled the thigh panels to cover up the facts they didn't paint the extra highlights seen on the original. I'm not angry, I'm not disappointed, really I'm just confused. The legs though, me, I'm glad they let you put the cars on the front. It's a little hard to pinpoint when this style caught on. All the big players in terms of aesthetics had them backwards like the toy, even Dreamwave, mind you. I believe it wasn't until IDW and fans projects that we started seeing the cars facing forward. Still, it's an aesthetic that I've always preferred, and I'm pleased as punch to see it return in full force here. I also love the inclusion of the toy-styled toes. Always preferred these to the rounded toon ones. This does bring up one of my two main gripes though, and although this first one is minor, it could potentially turn people off the whole set. The cars are supposed to be compatible in both upward and downward configurations. However, if you position them in the former option, Wild Rider always pushes ever so slightly against the toe assembly. This means Menasor will always be leaning to the left. Your left, that is, meaning his right. It's not really noticeable from a distance, but you can see it if you examine it closely from the back. Of course, this can be avoided if you leave them sloped downwards, which is how they're seen in most artwork anyway. But I know some people are going to be annoyed by this. I know I was at first, since that was my preferred look. However, since then I've become quite partial to the other way. Ultimately though, although this is a caveat worth mentioning, it's pretty damn minor. There's one other issue I have with this though, and this one's more substantial. As mentioned with the transformation, there's no real way to lock in the backpack section. No matter what you do, it's going to constantly flop around. From any front-facing pose, this won't be an issue, but it will fall down during any average play. Even if tight joints are enough to keep it up out of the box, and this wasn't the case for mine anyway, over time those will break down. And yes, there are solutions out there, such as this one I found on Etsy, but a couple of things. One, it's a fan-made 3D printed kit, so it's going to be expensive. 2, 3D printed plastic. Not everyone's into that. 3, I have no idea how good this thing is supposed to be. I ordered it towards the end of July, but due to the fact this is a fan kit made by one dude and not a multifaceted third-party production line, it's made to order and takes time to ship. It's simply not done yet at the time of editing this video, let alone shipped and on its way to me. And finally, as awesome as it is that fans took it upon themselves to fix this issue, you really shouldn't have to. Stuff like this is Combiner 101. It should function and stay together out of the box. I just end up looking at the rest of the engineering, seeing it in all its splendor, and I have to wonder why they looked over something so important. Still, even with that perfectly valid annoyance, you have to remember, that's just the backpack. Is it amateurish for a 360 Aussie dollary-do combiner set? Absolutely. Can you ignore it? Absolutely. And the way in which you ignore it is by engaging with the absolutely delightful articulation. There sadly aren't any extended bells and whistles like butterfly joints, double limb hinges, or foot pivots on show, but practically everything else you could ask for is here. Even as an ab crunch, which is damn awesome for a combiner. They're definitely being a bit reserved in some areas, likely to keep the engineering from becoming overcomplicated and to make sure the weight doesn't keep this guy from standing, but it's still very well articulated for a legend scale combiner, and even just a combiner in general. It's easily on par with the Iron Factory DJD, a figure I'd compare with, but sadly cannot due to external circumstances. Also, if you're thinking of getting the upscaled version, this is actually one of the few cases where they improved on the original. Thanks to the extra size allowing for more plastic stability, each finger gets one extra joint. Seems pointless to me, but it's something to note. Either way though, this guy poses like a champ and holds those poses like a champ. They even go above and beyond and let you remove the butt panel to open up extra posing from behind. It's completely pointless since it folds back anyway, but hey, you can see they aren't being lazy. From the get-go, this is a combined mode that has been handled with the utmost care. With the exception of the backpack, every aspect of this figure has been given an immense amount of attention. That being said, there's always been one particular problem with combiners: aesthetic preference. Investing in a singular figure when it's not your favorite aesthetic is one thing. It's a lot cheaper and you can justify the lower price tag. Combiners are expensive though. Doesn't really work. It's impossible to keep everyone happy unless you release multiple versions. And even then, redecos can only do so much. It's times like this that make me remember a certain certain video that Doug did on Overwatch versus Team Fortress 2. And although this analogy may seem odd at first, stick with me and it'll make sense in a bit. Most combiners are like Overwatch, solid on their own, but really rigid in terms of what you can do with them. You're not provided the tools to dress them up and change the experience in any meaningful way. Sure, you can modify them, but then that same figure will no longer be considered legitimate in the eyes of many. Of course, this analogy breaks down when you realize Hasbro and most third-party companies aren't complete and utter but the point still stands. Magic Square Menasor is much closer to Team Fortress 2, because right out of the box, you got options. Yes, the layout I have works well enough, but if you want something a little different, you can absolutely go for it. As alluded to earlier, most of the accessories related to this mode are part-swapping pieces. He also comes with an awesome sword and a delightful gun, and both look great, but surprisingly, these aren't the main event. I already mentioned how you can remove the shoulder pieces for a more toon-styled collarbone section, but keep an eye on these two because they're going to be important later. The most obvious accessory for anything of this sort is the head swap. I mean, even Hasbro is doing that these days. You've got the simple toon-styled head that disassembles and reassembles in a quick and easy swap. Probably the easiest head swap I've ever done. Massive kudos. And yeah, the head sculpt is pretty damn good. Not my personal favorite, but I cannot deny it's well done. Hilariously, it's even better than the Hasbro version, which is weird because usually their head sculpts are on point. Legacy many just happen to be a swing and a miss. One thing to note though, the KO version changes the way this functions, and it's way worse. Instead of a simple disassembly, these two are now separate heads on this weird connection port that barely holds at all. Sure, it means it's got a ball joint now, but I hardly think that's a worthy trade-off. Can't say I'm a fan of this. Sort of cancels out all the goodwill I had from the increased finger articulation. Although depending on how your copy fares, your goodwill may be lost in other ways long before you reach the head. The copy of the KO that Toy Guy owns hasn't exactly held up the best over the past couple of months. When he sent me the bulk of the footage back when I started work on Menasor month, it appeared to be fine, but now... well, I'll let him speak for himself.
Oh, there that went. And this just pops off real easy. And this one also, that took no effort. And Motor Master's not in there, but yeah, that's, oh, and Breakdown fell off. Pain.
Of course, this may not end up being how your copy fares. I had to go back and film my friend's copy again to get some comparison footage, and his still remains fine. It all goes back to that classic KO conundrum, the ever-present lack of quality control. Basically, it's a coin toss on whether the longevity of yours will be good or not. Personally, I'm not one who likes those odds, and would just recommend grabbing the original Magic Square, even in spite of its price. But hey, ultimately it's your choice, and not everyone has the finances for this expensive boy. Oh, and I guess I should cover the sizing of the KO as well, since I'll probably forget it later. Moving down, maybe you hate the segmented shoulder car look. To be honest, that's perfectly understandable, because until recently, this had never been a thing. Every version that doesn't use the cars on shoulder system had the cars be the arms. The skeleton thing, far as I can tell, was a third-party invention, which makes Hasbro's inclusion kind of interesting. So maybe you want the cars to be the arms. Well, remember the shoulder blocks from earlier? Those actually transform into slabs that house the skeleton fists. And said tabs have dedicated slots so you can tell which goes on which side. The arm skeletons then have their own special extra joints that fold out, and when you remove the skeleton arm, you get access to new locking tabs that also lock the new arms in place. Personally, I'm not really a fan of this. It looks much too thin for my taste, and there's an annoying trade-off where the built-in elbows aren't as solid as the skeleton ones. Also annoyingly, you have to turn one of Dragstrip's fists around to compensate for an exposed tab from the vehicle mode, and I find that even uglier than the exposed ones on Dead End. But hey, I know people who prefer this method on principle will be able to overlook these small gripes, just as I've overlooked gripes previously in this set to see the bigger picture. The fact they went to this trouble, even engineering extra joints in the arm members that you'd never use otherwise, is honestly insane. But maybe you want to go for the full toon look. Maybe those shoulder armor stylings are way more up your alley. Well, these slabs have even more functionality as they can fill in the parts of the skeleton that would normally be filled in by the bottom halves of the cars. Weirdly, they end up going in opposite directions, but I guess it's a minor sacrifice. The shoulders then have extra hinges that allow the cars to rotate outwards, leaving room for the elbow joint to function. Personally, I've always hated the way this looks. It's one of my least favorite combiner aesthetics, but I know someone somewhere will want them to look this way. Hell, someone's probably designing a kit that will let you do it on the Legacy version. There's a degenerate out there doing degenerate things. People are going to want this, and they built it as proper functionality into the combiner. It's not an upgrade kit, it's not a fan mode, it's a genuine feature. And although it absolutely isn't for me, I'm all here for it. So we've got the toon head, the toon shoulders, the toon arms, and of course the toon waist because I didn't bother with the toy one personally. Guess next up is the toon chest plates. Regrettably though, this one's a little less simple. It's a screw and unscrew job since his chest basically holds the entire torso together. Had they gone for a swap out piece, it would have massively f***ed with the combiner stability. For attention of minute-to-minute play simplicity, such a system was ultimately inevitable, like Western VTubers and unreasonable levels of horniness. Fortunately, DrLockdown Reviews does not condone such amorosity, and as such, in this household, we stand Girl DM. In the end, I get why they did it, and I still appreciate it's an option. It's something you'll probably change once or not change at all and then be done with it. Now, although I personally don't want to swap mine again so I can maintain the longevity of these pieces, I do have footage of the KO which already has the extra chest installed. It basically looks the same as this, only smaller. However, no toon aesthetic is complete without changing the legs. It's actually the most debated aspect of Menasor, truth be told. So of course you get simple, swappable thighs. But that's not the main event here, oh no. Magic Square has included an extra knee swivel that allows you to hide the cars away. I know this is another controversial element when it comes to Menasor, but you look at the screen model and, yep, that's accurate. I know it's technically supposed to be the underside of the cars, and the detail on the screen model even references the underside of the cars. But let's face it, if you want sunbow accuracy, that just isn't going to fly. And hey, at least they've added some sweet extra detail that modernizes the minimalist panels from the original. You can tell what they're supposed to be, but it ends up looking much more interesting in the end. And fear not, you don't lose the ankle tilt by doing this. The ankle is actually double jointed, so no matter which way you go, it still works. I wish Legacy had this functionality. The gimmick is pretty cool and all, but I really wish they'd given you the option, especially since these bits have the tendency to yell, "Motherfucker!" I don't believe it. I didn't even notice until I started scripting this. Come on, Hashtag, get your shit together! But either way, you can see where the true brilliance lies with this version of Menasor. It's not just one element that stands out as the main event, it's everything. This is where the two remaining complaints about this style come back into play. The ones specifically brought up in the last video. We've got complaints about the price and complaints about not being a real combiner. We've already seen half of the price debacle, seeing how intricate Motormaster is with his ingenious transformation and unparalleled sculpting maturity. This pushes it easily into the $90 range, so the question remains, is the trailer worth $110? Oath it is! Have you seen how it goes from a giant oblong to a well-proportioned robot? Have you seen the absolute insanity on show that still remains fun and not overcomplicated like their other releases? And then you get into the extra parts, allowing for a bunch of extra possibilities with mixing and matching aesthetics. And hey, aesthetic customization. How much time do you think you can spend figuring out all the different combinations? Plus, it may be a Legends combiner, but this isn't exactly a small fellow either. Previous third-party Legends gestalts have been sort of new leader class size, whereas this guy easily fits into the old leader scale, towering over what came before him. He's also really weighty too. Thanks to them not using that shitty plastic they're obsessed with, he feels solid as a rock. And you're telling me this release isn't worth 200s, and the full lineup isn't worth 360? Mate, the proof is there in the pudding. Yes, it's an expensive combiner, but they've done a lot with what you're paying for. No other combiner on the market gives you engineering like this, and they certainly don't give you these options. And then we get to the last issue. Quote, "This isn't a real combiner," unquote. From the get-go, people have criticized Menasor for not using the traditional combination system. Now yes, I could argue that that's what's required for a perfectly accurate Menasor, but I've never really cared for accuracy personally. Most people complaining don't particularly either. Here's the question though, who decides what a real combiner is and isn't? Back to Generation 1, we had the Micromaster combiners. Are they not real combiners because their thighs and torsos are formed from kibble pieces? Is Devastator not a real combiner because he uses a thigh adapter? Are Power Core combiners not real combiners because the limbs aren't sentient? Is Energon Optimus Prime not a combiner? F no, of course these things are combiners. The whole parts forming kibble thing isn't exactly new. Hasbro has been doing it for the entirety of the franchise. Yes, sometimes it gets excessive, but then that brings us to the second rebuttal. The proof once again being right there in the pudding. Look at how solid this combiner is. Look at how well he poses. Look at how cohesive everything looks. Do you really think all of this and all the extra options would have been possible without parts forming? When it comes to parts forming, I've always had a complicated history. At first I disliked all forms of parts forming, but then I got Iron Factory Overlord and I came around to characters that utilized it in unique and interesting ways. Then I got Iron Factory Bruticus and came around to combining parts forming. Then I got Studio Series Dark of the Moon Sideswipe and came around to cohesive weapon parts forming. Then I realized it could still be dog shit in some instances when I got Cliff Jumper. But honestly, constantly shitting on him is really tedious and that's beside the point. The final piece of the puzzle was understanding the benefits of a combiner skeleton. I was hesitant with this figure, even though I was blown away with the first two members. I still fit into that mindset of combiner skeletons are lazy, even though I already owned a few G1 Micromaster sets at the time. Sometimes, to realize the true brilliance of a new system, you really have to behold it in person. I constantly see people complaining about HasLab Unicron, on, calling it a consumerist farce that takes advantage of the backers. None of those complaints come from people who own it, just as none of the complaints about this system of combiner come from people who have bothered to actually give them a shot. And sure, sometimes this system doesn't save a toy from being bad, but when it does, it really elevates said figure to another level. To those who say this isn't a real combiner, I hope you've seen everything they've done across the entire set and realized there's a lot more under the hood. To those who say this is a lazy release, I hope you'll, well, do what I just said. It would be one thing if this was a steaming pile of shit, as most Magic Square releases are. Hell, after doing this lineup, they've learned practically nothing. Their sound wave goes right back to using the horrid plastic they always use, despite everyone insisting otherwise. And their Devastator was rushed to production in order to combat New Age, leading to an entire gestalt built on the engineering style of Ragnar. That's appalling! Like, what the f*** are you doing? And yet, this figure isn't a steaming pile of garbage. It's a true gem in the Legends paradigm. It showed me that just because a combiner uses a standard we're not typically used to doesn't mean the designers are lazy. There's a reason Hasbro went with this method for their Legacy lineup. It works in this instance. Magic Square Menasor is a testament to why one shouldn't prejudge every new thing that comes out. Sure, it may very well be a piece of trash, but it might also be hiding secret brilliance under the hood. And when a toy is so good that it beats the ever-living shit out of my own personal biases, well, that is the mark of a landmark release. If this combiner had just been the sum of its parts, it would have been a damn fine set. The vehicle modes are all sexy, the engineering has been good to fantastic, the robot modes have done pretty well, the build quality has been way more solid than they have any right to be, and the articulation has consistently delivered. Put those together into a standard level combiner and this set would have been worth your money easily. And yet, they didn't stop there. The combined engineering is beyond incredible. I have never seen a trailer transformation like this on the planet, even with similar ideas being used recently for Masterpiece Gutai. Practically every third-party Masterpiece trailer I've seen has worse engineering than this at double or triple the size and price. And the end result somehow looks worse most of the time. And those don't have the options this version has. If you have a style of Menasor you like, this figure can do it, and with the exception of the arms in one specific loadout, it can do it flawlessly. And that's ignoring the fact that as an action figure, even if it didn't transform, it hits every single mark a robot should. Extensive sculpting, tasteful paint applications, masterful cohesion that we haven't really seen with combiners that often, articulation that works insanely well considering this is 5 robots stapled together, minimal flaws that are easy to gloss over. We are well past just being a sum of his parts here. This video series was supposed to be 3 videos long, but I ultimately had so much to talk about because the hidden qualities just kept piling up on top of each other. It's a figure that lends itself to a long and meandering script because it's just that good. You want a reason why this is the best goddamn combiner in my collection regardless of scale? It's not just one reason. This is the reason. This is the reason. This is the reason. This right here is the reason. I have never seen a combiner go this above and beyond to tackle everything it possibly could and sacrifice so damn little. I have needed to make this video since the day I got this. I'm honestly frustrated it took this long simply because of the massive undertaking it was. I wish I had done this sooner because now it's off the market and not many people are able to grab him. It's just the bootlegs, and as alright as the one I covered is for the price, it's definitely got that KO jank. If you want the true experience, the original is the best way to get that. And I'm kicking myself for not having enough time to do it sooner. Had this video released last year, this figure would have jumped up the ranking in my best of 2022 video exponentially. But oh well, I'm sure when the New Age one hits the market, they'll probably flood the marketplace for cheap. And maybe the New Age one will be better, but even if it isn't, well, this one's already the best goddamn combiner I've ever handled anyway, so I'm cool either way. Oh, and one more thing. Sadly, there's no G2 repaint, which is a grave oversight. Magic Square really needs to get on that pronto. Anyway, as always, fandom public consciousness is a conversation, so drop your thoughts on this system of combiner below. Have you been convinced by the secret brilliance of parts-forming combiners? Do you still think it's a farce and deserves to be thrown in the trash? Are you excited for the future prospect of other combiners using this system? Apparently Hasbro is working on a new Bruticus, so that could be cool. And for those who have stuck with me to the end, thank you for joining me over this long, roughly 20,000 word journey. And a massive thank you to close friend and channel patron Jason Murray for letting me film his copy of the KO. Also, ginormous thank you to fellow YouTuber and also close friends That Toy Guy for letting me use his footage of the bootleg, as well as providing his point of view on a few things for clarification. Without the two of you, this series wouldn't nearly have been as comprehensive as it was. All in all, I'm really glad I was finally able to cover essentially every part of Magic Square Menasor I could think of. I honestly didn't expect to go this deep, but in regards to making a combiner that warrants this in-depth an analysis, Magic Square has delivered. It's been a long time coming for the sake of my own personal sanity, and it feels good to finally get my gushing out of my system. Yes, it's totally not a cover-up for the fact that Xenoblade Chronicles 3 dropped a week before the first installment of this series, and I've been releasing these week after week to cover up for the fact that I don't want to work on videos for a month and just want to play Xenoblade and nothing else. Yeah, as always, context for everything or some shit. Bye!